Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Radio Network. Inside Boxing Weekly is brought to you by Replenishing Care Technologies and Gridiron Mo. So make sure you go out to thegruelingtruth.net, check out both sponsors, click the logos, take you to their website. I'm your host for Inside Boxing Weekly, Mike Goodpaster. Right now I want to welcome in my co-host. First up, he's the guy that's been here the longest, so we'll introduce him first, Jeremiah Preisser.
Good evening, everyone. Excited to be on. Always excited to be on. Let's talk some boxing, Mike.
And, of course, we're bringing back every once in a while, just because Jeremiah feels sorry for him. We're going to bring in our resident lawyer, John Einreinhofer from West Virginia. How you doing, John?
Good to be here again, guys.
All right. We will start off. We got a lot to talk about from last week. We got a big fight coming up this week. We'll start off with David Benavidez, KO8 over Rogelio Medina. And we'll start off with John. What was your take on this fight? I thought Benavidez looked really good.
Yeah, Benavidez is somebody I've liked a lot from very early in his career, even though he's still young and in an early stage of his career. That was the way I really liked to see him look. That's what he looked like to me a few fights ago. Of course, and his opposition hasn't really increased that much. Medina was a bit of a step up. But, yeah, that's exactly the kind of performance I wanted to see out of him. I had a little bit of criticism. I thought he had weighed a heavyweight weight as a kid, and he was making 168 pounds. I usually don't think that makes that much of a difference from light heavyweight 175, but I thought maybe in his case he was trying to get it down a little too much. But I understand PBC and the management's thinking that 168 pounds is not particularly strong right now, and he's only 20 years old. He's got the capability of cutting through those guys right now, like you saw him do with Medina, who had given Gale a surprisingly difficult fight and gone the distance with him. So I think he is right on track to cut through the rest of the field at 168 pounds, and I would assume that after he does that, he'll be looking at the loaded 175-pound light heavyweight class after that, where there's all kinds of good fights, as we know. So he's definitely got a bright future. I think he'll be one of the top fighters in the sport before long.
Yeah, and the thing that impressed me the most, Jeremiah, is like he said, Medina went the distance with James DeGale. Benavidez got him out of there. Where do you think Benavidez goes from here? How close do you think he is to stepping up the level of competition, maybe into a top 10 fighter?
I mean, honestly, I think after Medina, it's not as if I think Medina is a top flight guy, but he's a tough guy. I mean, he's certainly a hard hitter. Well, he certainly showed that he was tough. I mean, some of the shots that he took from Benavidez were tremendous. I mean, geez, some of the uppercuts that he absorbed were out of this world. But, I mean, right now, I mean, looking at his skill level, I mean, he's rarely had a hiccup. So, in my opinion, he's ready for the best of the best right now. I mean, but Jack, I don't see him at 168 any longer. James DeGale, I mean, I don't see him as some dominant type figure. You've got, Groves and Chunov also coming up this week. I mean, I think Benavidez is ready for the best of the best right now. I'm not quite sure how they'll move him, but I imagine that he'll get a strap fairly easily. But I'm like John. I like the guy. I mean, he's got quick hands for a big guy. He's got good punching power, strong combinations. I like what I see so far.
All right, that brings us to what I thought was the biggest injustice of the night. And it wasn't even the punch. It was the fact that this kid Relic kicked Rancis Barthelomew's ass, I think, and he got completely screwed out of the decision. I mean, I had him winning the fight by 4 or 5 points. The judges, I mean, had it anywhere from 6 to 8 points for Bartholomew. John, what do you think of the fight and the scoring?
I thought Relic won it by a point. I believe I had it. I definitely thought he won the fight. I could not see any argument for Bartholomew winning the fight. I've always been kind of a big fan of Bartholomew's talents, and I don't want to go overboard, but I really do think that it looked to me like that was just a fight where Bartholomew is hitting the downhill slope. Relic did come to fight, and he fought well. I don't want to take anything away from him, but it just didn't look like the same Bartholomew, and I'm not going to attribute it to, well, he's at 140 pounds, and didn't really look out of shape either. He just looked to me like a guy who the defensive skills had started to erode. Out of the the Cuban boxing style, the guys that have that boxing type of a style, like Rigondeaux, Ugas, Lara. I thought Barthélemy threw more power punches. I didn't see he did that a little bit to the body, but I just didn't see that. He just didn't look to me like the fighter he was even recently, and I think he's headed downhill. And I thought Relic did deserve the decision. I can't see any case for Barthélemy winning the fight.
Well, the only disagreement we have is I thought he won it by a lot more than a point. And really, I mean, John, if you've only got him winning by a point, you can see how Barthélemy can win because you changed one round there that you had differently, and you got a draw right then.
Yeah, but I just didn't. In other words, I didn't see that. In other words, I felt like I was being kind enough to Barthélemy, and I felt like Relic had still, well, remember there was some odd. If you go back in the fight, I remember one key round was when Relic went down. He had dominated the round so much that I only gave Barthélemy a 10-9 round that particular round. That's one of the things that was on my mind. But I thought Relic won the fight. I don't think there was a case, to change it around where Barthélemy won the fight. In terms of the way the rounds were scored, I felt like Relic won it, or if somehow it would have come out for somebody as a draw, I still, wouldn't have think that was great. But somebody had Barthélemy winning by 8-9 points. That was insane.
I think one of them had like 117 to 109.
Yeah, that was just crazy the way that fight played out, and felt bad for Relic there because he came to fight and he deserved better, and Barthélemy just did not look good, and I got a feeling he's a guy on a downhill slide at this point.
All right, Jeremiah, what was your opinion of the decision in the fight?
Yeah, well, no, I'm like you. I mean, I probably had it in between you and John. I had Relic by about 4, but I mean, this is the second time that Relic, who's a Ricky Hatton-trained fighter, by the way, I think that's worth noting. Relic also. And
there was only one Ricky Hatton, Jeremiah.
Only one, but
Hatton did not train him Hatton's out of his corner now, but he still promotes him. He did.
It doesn't matter because me and Jeremiah love Ricky Hatton, so anytime we have a chance to talk about Ricky Hatton, we do.
He still promotes him.
Did you know he beat Kostya one time, John?
Yeah, that was an impressive victory.
No, but I mean, Relic, I thought he outworked him. I mean, Relic's a pretty tall guy himself. But I just thought he outpaced Barthélemy. And for me, it's been kind of a hit or miss thing for me with Barthélemy. Well, you obviously see the long amateur background, and he's well schooled, and he understands the jab and whatnot. I mean, he has had these sort of up and down performances before. I mean, I remember earlier in his career when he struggled hard against the guy from Afghanistan. I believe his name was Usmani. But I mean. Yeah, I had Relic winning. I thought he outpaced him. But what I was going to say before is there was an argument to be made that he also beat Ricky Burns. So, I mean, this kid is not bad. I mean, I think he's relatively young, and I don't think he's taken much punishment in these fights. So, I mean, he's one to watch.
All right. Did we come to the Andre Dirrell fight, won by a disqualification 8 rounds over Jose Usteki? Jeremiah, what was your take on the fight, the punch, and the aftermath?
Oh wow, yeah. Where to start? Well, I mean, I thought the fight was pretty good up until the stoppage. I mean, for me, I thought it was one of those moments. You know what I mean? And John and I talked about this on social media, where you look at what happened at the end of the fight there, and there's just no universal way to apply these rules. Some guys just end up getting a point deduction. Some guys just end up getting a warning. It just kind of all depends on what's going on. And a lot of times it depends on how the fighter reacts. I mean, if you see a guy like, Montel Griffin, when he was hit late against Roy Jones Jr., he got laid down. Andre Dirrell versus Arthur Abraham, so this isn't his first experience with this kind of stuff. Dirrell laid there and he, basically called for a DQ. Some of these guys take it a bit better, and again, they get slaps on the wrist. So, I mean, the fight up until that point I thought was fairly competitive. I mean, I like the guy's spirit. I mean, this is a guy I've seen fight a couple of times, and I thought he was fairly impressive against Korobov. I'm not saying he was, again, top world-class material, but he's a go-getter. He's got good power. His hand speed's pretty solid. But the punch itself was after the bell. That was clear after watching it a number of times. That I concede to. But it just seemed like it was in the flow of things. It looked as if he caught him with a straight right hand that set the left hook up well, and that was ultimately what knocked him down. But the reaction from the cornerman afterwards in punching Uzdegay was downright disgraceful. I mean, I'm glad that they're charging him, with first-degree assault. They found him. He's been banned from boxing. I think that's just.
All right, John.
Yeah, I saw it similarly. The rules just don't seem to be applied consistently. I think, first of all, the punch after the bell, I think you have to look at it. There's kind of different degrees of those types of things, and it wasn't a case where Dirrell had let his guard down and he was letting up, and then the guy clocked him. It was in the flow of a combination, and it was after the bell. Fans of 80s boxing, which we are, and I know Jeremiah is a top historian, you'll remember when Thomas Molinares was fighting Marlon Starling, and it was right after the bell, and he clocked him and knocked him out. And
that happened a couple times when they fought, didn't it?
If I recall, Molinares, they gave him the bell, the WBA bell. Now, of course, that's WBA stuff, but and then Molinares had problems after that, some personal mental issues, but then there's other, you've seen it called also before when there's this would be years ago, and I'm not necessarily arguing that it's better, but again, the consistency where if the fighter goes down from a foul and he's given 5 minutes to continue and he chooses not to continue, then he's DQ'd. Now, I think for safety reasons, they don't want to call it that way anymore, and I understand that. With what we know, we know boxing's arguably the most dangerous sport. Even if you love the sport, there's no disputing that. And I can't say that that's not a good rule for the safety of the fighters and erring on the side of safety. So I'm not going to really argue for that to be called the way I've seen it called in the past. But you go back to Dirrell with Abraham. I mean, there are medical reports that he was out a year and a half for neurological issues after that. Now, assuming that that's accurate, he's more susceptible to that type of thing. There just becomes a lot of issues there, and I think his uncle, Mr. Dillon, that's clearly an assault there, and he should be charged with assault, and that's rightfully so. I just read right before we came on, Dirrell talked to the Ring about it, and they had just put that up within the last couple of hours, and he's not making any excuses for what his uncle did, but talking a little bit about that background, that he's had the injury and everybody was upset when they saw him down. As for Andre Dirrell himself being down after that shot that landed just after the bell, you just don't know. Is he more susceptible? He was down twice against the Gale. His brother, though, Anthony here, was telling him to stay down, and Andre doesn't dispute that in the Ring interview. I'd make an argument here. To me, a lot of this stuff, it just always seems to, for me, go back to the alphabets, but I can't help it. It's the truth. You would maybe argue we don't know what Andre's condition was, but if it weren't for this crazy interim alphabet title stuff and fighting DeGale again for an alphabet belt after this, if it was just a fight, would he have maybe thought about getting up? I don't know. We're not in his body and not really questioning him there, but in other words, the idea being, again, though, there was no dispute. Anthony was telling him to stay down. The idea being, well, you have to secure this alphabet fight with DeGale after this one. They'd fought within the last 2 years. And I think why I say that is the fighter's looking at it. Well, if I have an alphabet belt, then there, and I win, there can be a defense, and assuming maybe they're going to get more money, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. So to me, it just things always get clouded by all this crazy alphabet soup organization stuff.
Yeah, and when you look at these guys, the Dirrells, they're guys that are, there's no question they've got talent. They're very talented guys. But I would say, if you look at their careers from right now back, they have to be a little bit of a disappointment, John.
I agree. With their amateur pedigree, and we've seen great spurts. I love the way, Andre boxed against Carl Frosch. I really did think he got robbed there, and he fought very, very well. I thought it was a great performance for him, and it was it was relatively early in his career. And, Anthony had I believe it was cancer, so, he did have some out-of-the-ring difficulties there, and he was always a little bit more of the puncher. But then, just when you thought he might be coming on a little bit, he just didn't perform well against Badu Jack. Maybe Jack's a little bit better in hindsight than I thought he was at the time. He has fought pretty well starting at that point. Eddie Mustafa Muhammad training him, an underrated trainer. He's been on the show before, I know. And, but the Dirrells having some of the better amateur pedigree out of the Americans of the last few Olympic cycles. I agree. You would have thought it would have been a little bit more. They both just stayed at 168 pounds. As we know, and I know Jeremiah isn't either. I don't think you are either, Mike. I'm not a fan of these junior and super divisions, and they've been at 168 pounds their whole career. I know a lot of fans don't look at it that way, but just the point is, even just for how long they've been around, you would think that one or both of them would be up at light heavy by this stage of their career, and they're still, again, 168-pound interim belt is what Andre was fighting for, and Anthony's supposed to take on Callum Smith for the WBC belt, and then Benavides is supposed to get the winner of those two. I meant to chime that in before. I think that's pretty set, and you got the PBC connections there, so that's going to happen. Looks to me like Benavides is going to cut through all those guys. I think Callum Smith's pretty good. Out of all the recent British guys coming up, some of them I think are overrated when they fight domestic competition. I don't really feel that way about Callum Smith because he's a very big guy for that weight, and he's a very big puncher. And that's not something you see coming out of the UK all the time, but he is that. So I think Anthony Dirrell, if that fight still goes through after all that happened last Saturday night, I think he's going to have trouble there. And then even if he gets through that, then you're looking at Benavides, and I don't know if the future is looking too bright for the Dirrells right now.
All right, so Jeremiah, we will give you Liam Walsh. We were just talking about English boxers that may not be that good. Got knocked out in the third round, stopped in the third. What was that?
Good segue there, Mike.
Yeah, well, that's the first thing that came to my mind because Liam Walsh, I don't even know why Liam Walsh was fighting Gervonta Davis. I know Davis got to fight somebody.
Liam Walsh didn't know that either, Mike. When he was,
and thousands of people that showed up cheering his name. They must really get drunk in England before these fights to convince themselves that these guys can win. But Gervonta Davis, I like him, Jeremiah. I think he's going to be a really good fighter. But I would like to see him against somebody who can put up a little bit of a fight because Liam Walsh was a joke as a competitor against him.
Yeah, I'm not going to give this a too difficult of a thrashing. Davis is pretty young. What is he? 22 years old.
Well, yeah, and you want to go to England to get paid because there's enough people there that are convinced Liam Walsh might have a chance.
Yeah, they're kind of a bit like the Mexican fans, where they just show up even when these guys are huge underdogs. I was watching the Linares Carolla rematch the other day, and they were just cheering him on. I'm like, this dude he's not going to get it. But anyways, Walsh just was overmatched. But again, I'm not going to tear it down too much because I believe it was Davis's first defense, and you see this all the time. You see guys take on their they're voluntaries. They get to pick whoever they like, beat up guys that are overmatched. It happens. But, Walsh, in the first round is more of a feeling out process. There's a lot of feints, not a whole lot going on. But then when Davis decided to turn it up, you could see that his talent level was just clearly superior to Walsh's. Walsh had size, I'll give him that. But in terms of boxing skill, he just clearly wasn't on Davis's level. What I like about Davis is that he's quick and he's got power. You don't always see that. He seems to be pretty accurate. I mean, Walsh is moving his head fairly well, but Davis had, he kept catching him. But again, when he decided to turn it up, he got Walsh out of there, and it was a good performance. But like you said, I'd like to see him in with some of the better guys. And I actually think Davis has a good future. Again, like you guys, I'm not a fan of the junior super divisions, but at 130, I think Davis does a lot of damage because when you look at the landscape there, a lot of these guys are bangers. You look at Burchelt, you look at Mira, you look at Salido, you look at, Vargas, whether or not, he'll still be a player. A lot of the top-level guys are bangers, and I think that plays into Gervonta Davis's hands. I don't see any of those guys hanging with Davis, though, of course, I think it still stands to see what Davis has really got in terms of heart and chin, because, Walsh, I don't even know if he landed a solid punch in the fight. I mean, he may have landed a jab or something, but I didn't really see him land anything of note. So, I think there, and there's always that interesting styles contrast when you get guys who are athletically gifted and have those sort of tools like Davis, and then you pair them against, one of those rugged guys. A lot of times they happen to be Mexican, but I still think there's an interesting style clash. But Davis looks to be too much for just about all these guys, minus guys like Vasil Lomachenko. I think Lomachenko is certainly a step too far in that regard. But of course, when you win what they call a world title, you can't be too far away from fight the best. I mean, that's the lunacy of modern boxing. I mean, you have guys like Anthony Joshua, and Davis who they earn these world titles, but they're still considered a work in progress. Davis is still that. Lomachenko's a step too far, but good performance by him.
All right, John, the one thing that me and Jeremiah were discussing, not on air, but this was Jeremiah's take on this and his worry. Hate to speak for you, Jeremiah, but I think this is a good segue and something we need to talk about. With Floyd Mayweather basically handling his career, that Mayweather's big on keeping that zero at the end of that record. Do you think maybe this is a case where they will overprotect Davis?
Well, I think Jeremiah said it perfect when he talked about the world title thing. From a business perspective, this is where some of the promoters and managers are getting clever with their very top guys, like Gervonta Davis, Anthony Joshua, David Benavidez. We talked about. You get these guys in a weak division or targeting a weak belt holder early on in their career, and they actually are quote-unquote a world champion while they're actually still developing their career. And I think their management and their promoters perfectly know this, and then it just depends at how long do they want to take them through this developmental process before they start taking on the guys that we all know are really the challenges. Floyd Mayweather, I think he does a pretty good job when he shows up. He's in the UK at the fight. He's given interviews about it. I mean, he draws attention, and that kind of generally helps boxing and its fighters. So I think that's good. He said after the fight, as Jeremiah said, and I agree, Davis doesn't have the experience level for Lomachenko yet. So despite the plastic belt stuff with all these guys with these added divisions and, 4 major quote-unquote organizations, they both have belts. He's not, and of course there's promotional issues there too, but even Floyd Mayweather was willing to address it theoretically, and he's saying that not yet, this is not the time yet, which I think we all agree with. I would guess this is probably not going to excite anybody, although like Jeremiah says, at least at 130 pounds, there's some action-type guys. When you look at the promotional availability, since he's a free agent, and this fight almost happened before the Pedraza fight, I'm going to take a guess that Jason Sosa could be stepping in there next because it provides at least a reasonable amount of action. He's also an East Coast guy, New Jersey, Davis's, Maryland. They could put that somewhere on the East Coast on a PBC card somewhere. I mean, I'm not saying we might not want to see more, and I'm not saying Davis isn't capable more. I think, like Jeremiah said, he's probably capable of taking everybody in that range except for Lomachenko, and then we'll look at the 135-pound lightweight guys and Danny Garcia. But outside of that, I mean, heck, he could probably take a shot at anybody else in that range. I think he could, but I would think then you got to think who's available, and maybe I was thinking that Jason Sosa, since that was just a whisker away from happening before the Pedraza fight, and I think he's available as a free agent, even though he's been on HBO a couple of times. That I would guess that would be a guy that could be a possibility.
Well, I would much rather watch Jason Sosa try to fight Gervonta Davis than I would Liam Walsh.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Sosa comes to fight, so that's where you have mixed emotions. Some of these fights where you're like, well, it's not the greatest matchup necessarily talent-wise we'd like to see, but, guys that bring certain styles. And, if Jason Sosa is going to fight Gervonta Davis, you're going to turn that on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing is just the toughness alone. We haven't really seen Davis late in fights against somebody that's still going to be coming after him, which Sosa will come after him for the entire fight.
Yeah, Sosa's going to come to fight, and that would be a good collision for as long as it lasts.
Yeah, I'd like to see that a lot. No, I was just going to say real quickly. Yeah, that I like to see that because there's like that trial and error period what you see with these athletic guys to see whether or not they can maintain it, over the distance. It's one thing to do it in the amateurs, when the fights are shorter, but doing it over the distance, sometimes we see these athletic guys with good skill, they get upset by those, hard-nosed fellows who just keep bringing it. So we'll see.
All right, that brings us to Gary Russell, who didn't look rusty at all, Jeremiah, in this 7-round TKO win over Escondón. No,
not at all. I mean, I think we talked before that, it was just, Escondón he was up against too much here. Russell, he looks good. I think he looks better, though. I do think that he's progressing. It looks as if he's not shoe-shining as much as he used to, because when you watch him against guys like Lomachenko and some of the other guys earlier in his career, he shoe-shined a bit. He wasn't putting his body behind the punches. He still does that from time to time, and I think he's probably always going to do it because of his hand speed. He recognizes that he's one of the fastest, if not the fastest guys in boxing. But yeah, I mean, I thought he was putting his body behind his punches a bit better. In terms of talent, he's rock solid. I mean, and he's fighting in a loaded division. He's with a promoter who can likely, get him in with the other best guys. But I liked his performances. I think, his right hook was strong, his straight was strong. He was just too much. I mean, I thought and there was good action, mind you, but Russell was just too much. This is a guy that I have to see. Again, after these performances, I mean, he looks really good against everybody, except when he stepped up to his best opponent. He looks different there. So I need to see this guy against the Santa Cruzes of the world, the Carl Framptons of the world, et cetera, et cetera. He looks damn good. I just need to see him in with a real test.
All right, so John, as we look forward to Russell, where does he go from here? What do you think his next step will be? And what do you want it to be?
Well, I'm glad we're all on this theme because I really like Gary Russell Jr. a lot and Gervonta Davis, what they're both sort of doing. Style's a little bit different, but I like both of their attitudes in the ring. These guys, have some skill, have some speed, but they also have some power, and they seem to have a grasp that they want to get people out of there for the fans. And when I see a guy as skilled as Gary Russell doing that, and he's not taking unnecessary shots, but he understands that part of boxing, like Emmanuel Stewart used to always preach, boxing needs knockouts. Gary Russell Jr. understands that. Gervonta Davis understands that. They are not content to let these guys go 12 rounds that they feel that they're going to beat anyway. They want to get them out of there. They understand that adds to their marketability and what they're trying to do. I'd love to see, Russell also, against Santa Cruz or Frampton. I think PBC and, Al Heyman can make that happen, and I don't think he's against making that happen. That's assuming Santa Cruz beats Morris again, which I think he will, but it's probably not a complete certainty, as good as Morris looked against Cuellar. But I think I was thinking this might make some sense in the meantime, and I did hear a little bit of talk afterward, and I think he's fighting this weekend, which is the other Selby might be fighting this weekend, but he could be fighting Lee Selby maybe in the interim. I mean, that would be his chance to pick up some UK money, like a lot of other Al Heyman PBC fighters, some good, some bad, are doing. And you got to give PBC and Heyman credit for that from a business perspective, understanding that these guys can really sock something away in their bank account and then go on from there. Maybe I'm thinking it's Gary Russell's turn. If they can't get Frampton yet and set that up, then maybe he gets Selby. Fight he should win, but could be a good payday for him in the UK, and it's a legit top 10 fight, which is all I usually ask for. So if you're really looking divisionally, what you get there. So I'd love to see him against Frampton or Santa Cruz now, or the Santa Cruz Morris winner. But I'm thinking Lee Selby. Maybe he gets the UK payday there. That's not horrible, and we can see if he can blow out Selby like he's been blowing out these other guys.
Yeah, it's a step up.
Yeah, it's a legit top 10 guy. So it might be interesting to see how that one plays out.
All right, and Terrence Crawford again was impressive with TKO in 11 rounds over Felix Diaz. John, what was your take on Crawford?
Crawford, for me, he did what I expected him to do. Felix Diaz, is an Olympic gold medalist. He has the amateur pedigree. He's a good fighter, but and I did say this last week, so I'm not saying it after the fact. If you looked at him though against Lamont Peterson and against Sammy Vasquez, a fight that he barely won. He's not a power puncher, and even though he's got boxing skill, he's not big for the division, and he has to come forward, and it just didn't feel to me like it was going to play out well for him, and it didn't. I obviously think Terrence Crawford's for real, and I'm like everybody else there, but some of the opposition. I'm going to be fair to Crawford. I thought when he fought Ray Beltran at lightweight, I was kind of saying he should have gotten this guy out of there, and it's Ray Beltran. And if there's one thing I've learned as I've gotten older is that you make better predictions and decisions when you adjust your mindset. And what I'm saying is I look back now a couple of years ago and what Ray Beltran's done since, and the fact that he was probably on PEDs when he fought Terrence Crawford, that's looking like a pretty good win. So what I'm saying is, the wins over John Molina and Lundy and Diaz, he's getting him out of there, which he should. We talked about Russell doing that and Gervonta Davis doing that. So I like how Crawford does that, and I think that's helped his marketability a lot. He also gets that. I think he seems to have gotten that even more. But in terms of actually who he's fought, I'm looking – Gamboa just folded up against Castellanos. You look at who he's been in with, and you had Postol in there. He looked great in that fight and dominated the fight. But Postol hasn't done anything since. Maybe he will. I'm just saying I'd like to see Terrence Crawford against a good welterweight. I think a lot of people would, and forget this 140-pound thing and give me somebody good for him to fight at welterweight is like so I can feel like I've got a real good gauge at where he's at. I think he will pass that test, and he's going to be competing at the top of the welterweight division. I mean, that's what he's destined for, and that's a division that's got excitement in a lot of people. But I'm just anxious to see that. I'd like to get to that now.
Well, and I think, Jeremiah, that's the way it's headed just from listening to Crawford's post-fight interviews. I think that we're going to see something like that. I wouldn't mind seeing maybe a quick fight against Mikey Garcia, though, in the meantime. But I think welterweight's where he's headed to. How do you think he'll fare against the best welterweights?
I think that's a good call. I wouldn't mind seeing him against Mikey Garcia. I mean, that's probably, the best guy that he could fight below 147. I mean, there's just not much at 140 for him. I mean, nothing that's really going to get me up, even though so many people are talking about the Ndongo fight. I just don't get it. Yeah, the alphabet trinkets, let's unify them. I really don't care. I mean, Crawford is the man. He beat Postle. That was the number 2 guy. But at 147, I think he fits in real nicely there. I mean, I saw the question posed earlier, who would win between Crawford and Thurman? And Thurman is, at this moment, he's seen as the best welterweight in the world. I mean, that may change with the Brook-Spence fight. I don't know. But the vast majority of people picked Crawford, and I think understandably so. I mean, Crawford has just about all the tools you could want in a fighter. I mean, oftentimes you hear the HBO commentary team compare him to Marvin Hagler. And while I think, there's some justification in there that there's not some justification for that, the styles, I think, is pretty spot on. I mean, you've got a guy who can switch hit, a guy who can hit from power from both sides, a guy who understands the jab, a guy who can be aggressive, a guy who can box. I mean, when I look at, the 147-pound landscape, Thurman is a guy who can box a bit, who can bang a bit, and that's probably the closest. That's probably the guy who looks like he can do the most so far. But Crawford just looks to be better at it. I mean, he's got natural size, so I think he'll fill in really nicely there. I honestly, depending on how Spence-Brook plays out, I'm going to hold my tongue until then, though I don't see, if Brook ends up winning that fight, I still think he struggles to make weight. I still don't think he's going to be there that long. But barring that fight, I think Crawford beats anybody there, even Spence, really. I mean, right now I would favor Crawford over Spence. I would favor him over Brook. I think he fits in real nicely there, and I think he's probably the future welterweight champion.
All right, we'll segue that. We'll start looking at this coming week's biggest fights. We got George Groves will be fighting Fedor Chudnov for something called the WBA Super World Super Middleweight Championship, whatever the hell that is. I don't know what that is. Maybe John can explain it to us here as we intro the fight and talk to him about it, but I don't think he knows either. But you've got...
I wished I didn't know. I don't know why I do know, but
okay. Well, maybe just keep it to yourself so people don't think you're weird then, or that maybe you work for the WBA and their super middleweight championship fight. But George Groves, of course, probably most famous for the 2 losses to Carl Froch, lost to Badou Jack. Since then, he's won 4 fights. Probably the biggest name on there is Martin Murray, who I think has seen his better days. He's fighting Fedor Chudnov. That's a hell of a name. He's 14-1 with 10 knockouts.
And Mike, what were Martin Murray's better days? Tell me what those were.
Oh, they were days, a few years ago. But it's kind of like me and Jeremiah. Our better days are past us too. But Chudnov has fought Felix Sturm twice, won a split decision once, a majority decision the other time. The thing that worries me here, Jeremiah, is Chudnov has almost no hand speed, but he does have good power. And George Groves, as we talked about, his 3 biggest fights, he lost. And, I mean, he's been hurt by Froch, by Jack, by Kenny Anderson. I mean, he's been hurt by a lot of guys. What kind of chance do you get Chudnov here to be able to land a punch to maybe pull the upset?
Yeah, well, I would say that, just noting real quickly before I dive into this, should be noted that Chudnov did lose the fight against Sturm on the judges' scorecards, though most people that I know who watched that fight had Chudnov winning. Not only that, Sturm was caught with PEDs in his systems afterwards, so I'm not quite sure, that's just one of those cases of the silly alphabet trinket organizations not enforcing rules uniformly. That should have been a win for Chudnov. But he's
I guess, Jeremiah, anytime that Sturm only wins by a majority decision in Germany, you know he lost.
Yeah, there's been a number of those. He's the Sven Ottke of 160, though. He's been knocked off a few times. But Chutinov is a good fighter. I saw the fights against Sturm, so he's a solid fighter. He's one of those atypical European guys where he comes at you with a high guard, works behind the jab, though he lets the power punches go. He's accurate with his shots. I mean, he goes to the body fairly well. So he's not a bad fighter. Groves, like you said, he's been knocked off, and if Carl Froch is listening to this, I'm sure he's salivating over the thought of him knocking out Groves in front of 80,000 at Wembley. But Groves, I think, has done pretty well since the losses. I mean, yeah, Murray's seen his better days, but Groves has been winning these fights fairly clearly. I don't know if I don't know if he's gotten over the mental hump of being knocked out. It's hard to say because he hasn't been in a tough fight. But I would favor Groves here. I think overall he's a bit better. Chutinov, he's fairly heavy-footed. He doesn't look like he can track a guy down that much. He doesn't throw a ton of punches. So I see Groves, picking his spots, working behind the jab, and probably scoring a close decision win. Nothing spectacular, but I think he ekes it out here and earns a decision.
All right, John, what's the WBA Super World Super Middleweight Championship? And then who do you think is going to win the fight?
Well, what it is, in my opinion, Mike, is something designed for George Groves to pick up because the British fans completely buy into these things. That's what it is, and I think that's what this fight's about.
Well, I'll tell you the thing that disappointed me was this. This has absolutely nothing to do with either one of these fighters, but I watched The Fighter tonight, the movie about Mickey Ward, and it absolutely drove me nuts to listen to them for the last 40 minutes say that Mickey Ward was going to fight for the WBU championship against Shea Neary, and he would be a world champion like his whole family had always wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Mickey Ward story was good enough where you didn't have to have him emphasize.
Yeah, because I don't remember anybody thinking he was a world champion from that win.
The WBU title against Shea Neary, I mean, that was a good fight, seeing Ward win by knockout. I remember watching it live if it happened, and I wasn't concerned that the WBU title was at stake. To think that I loved the movie, but it was, I did also chuckle at the same thing when I was watching it, that they were going to emphasize Ward picking up the WBU title, but they were going to leave the Gotti fights out of the movie. Not a great script.
Yeah, I still don't understand leaving the Gotti fights out of the movie.
Yeah, not great script writing in my opinion there, but I do think it gets back to, I have a theory on this too, and I don't think it's me being an ugly American. I just think it's factually supported. I think American boxing dominated for so long, and when there were less divisions and titles, the Europeans, again, it's just fact. The Europeans and the British could not pick up a real title. They had to suffer through decades and decades of that. And then we got 168-pound divisions created and WBOs and IBFs. And all of a sudden, their fighters were, quote-unquote, world champions. And I think it became like eating potato chips for them or something like that. They're still enjoying it so much after all those decades in the wilderness of not having any champions that they just can't get enough of these plastic belts. And as we all three of us know, any promoter in this business and manager of fighters, they're going to be happy to, from a business perspective, jump on that. And you're going to just until the Europeans and the British fans start looking at that differently and start becoming more critical of these alphabet organizations, like the Americans traditionally were, because probably, again, going back to the origins of this, the fans in the United States didn't have to worry about any of their fighters picking up titles when there was 8 divisions and 1 champ a division, but for fans in other countries, the chances of their fighters becoming quote-unquote a world champion weren't very high. So I think that's where we get a lot of these fights.
All right. So who do you see winning this one?
I see it as Jeremiah does. I think Groves probably takes a decision here. You know, he's not bad. He has a decision over DeGale. He fights competently. I think that this is it doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but I think this is kind of designed for him to get a belt. I think that's what this is about. They tried it with Martin Murray, and he still couldn't grab one. But I think that Groves, he beat Murray, so I think it's a safe assumption to say that he's a little bit better than him, and he probably does have enough to get it done with this opportunity being presented to him.
All right. I like the upset. There, I said it. So Jeremiah will owe me $200 if I'm right.
Yeah, well, I don't know what Jeremiah you're barking with, but I don't think
if I'm wrong, he'll only owe me $100. But all right, deal. John heard it. He's a lawyer. Write up the contract, John. Let's go.
Yeah, I didn't know Jeremiah was a Fedor Chudinov.
I'm a big Fedor Chudinov fan, so I think Fedor Chudinov wins the fight, or gets screwed out of the decision, but wins the fight, if you know what I mean. Errol Spence, Kell Brook, main event for something that makes more sense to me, the IBF World Welterweight Championship. Spence is undefeated, 21-0. Brook, coming off his only loss, which was Gennady Golovkin, which actually gave Golovkin problems until the 5th round, where things went a little bad for him. He won a majority decision over Sean Porter. Spence is a little bit more unknown. He's 21-0 with 18 knockouts. Hadn't fought quite the level of competition. He did beat Chris Algieri. He did beat Leonard Bundu. John, I'll start off with you. Who do you like here?
I like Spence. I look at this, and this is what I think boxing needs. I'm not even looking at the IBF belt. I'm looking at it that this is a true top 10 welterweight fight, Brook being just at the top and Spence being solidly top 10. What's interesting, though, to me is that Brooks only fought 2 top 10 caliber fighters in Sean Porter, where he didn't look good. He got a decision. I had him winning the fight by about 2 points maybe. I thought the fight could have gone either way, though. It was a very sloppy fight. And then I think his performance against Golovkin was a bit overrated. I don't think, he probably came in real good shape. It was short notice. He didn't have to struggle to make weight at middleweight, so he wasn't going to have to worry about that. And he basically shot his load in a round and then got run out of the ring. But that's 2 more top 10 fighters than Spence has been in. Spence hasn't been in with any. I like Errol Spence a lot. I think he's for real. I think you've got a southpaw with fast hands who punches to the body, shows good power, and he's got good boxing skills. I don't think you can ask for much more than that. But the one caveat is just we've got to project. He hasn't been in with legit top 10 opposition, in my opinion, and I think that's clear. So you've got to project that he's going to be able to take those skills and that ability in against a guy like Brook on the road in the United Kingdom without having any experience against top 10 opposition. I'm going to say in his case, I think he's talented enough to do it, and I'll go far enough that I think he's going to get a stoppage in around the 7th round in this one. But the one caveat being, again, we've got to project he has not fought a legit top 10 opponent, but Brook hasn't been in with that many either, and his performances against the 2 were certainly not dominant performances. One a knockout loss, and one he got a very, very sloppy decision. One thing I'm curious about in this fight is, is Brook going to come in there and let his hands go, or is he going to do some sort of a boxing, with a little bit of clutching and grabbing involved? I'm not certain. I'm curious to see what his strategy is going to be for this fight and how he's going to approach it, because he does have fast hands and some power. So if he opens up, it could be a great fight while it lasts. But we'll just have to see how that plays out. And on Spence's side of it, I mean, even though you can talk before you get in there. He hasn't been in with a top 10 guy, and he's got to go over to the UK And he could have a little bit of the case of nerves doing that. But I don't think he will. I think he's the real deal. I've got to project here. I'm going to project, and I think Spence is the real deal. So I'm going to predict him by a stoppage probably in about the 7th round.
All right, Jeremiah, I would say one of the things that concerns me here, not just the first top 10 opponent, but his first top 10 opponent is, a long way from home. Let's put it that way. They're fighting in England. It's going to be a big crowd. They're all going to be on Brook's side. It's going to be really interesting to see how Spence reacts to that. And I think if Spence does react well, puts on a good performance, I think we do have something special here potentially.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and I think all of your concerns are worth noting. I mean, it is one thing to, and Errol Spence does seem to be taking it all in stride. I mean, mentally, physically, he seems to be relaxed. But, of course, when you get into such a hostile atmosphere, because Brook has been gaining in popularity in the UK. And from what I gather from UK fans, because I converse with a lot of them, Brook seems to be, their guy. I mean, besides Joshua, of course, but Brook seems to be very, very popular. So, again, we won't know until fight night whether or not he can take that mentally. But we'll see. Again, he does seem to be taking it in stride. But, again, like the concerns, that John laid out, my thing about Spence is, we have to project so much in modern boxing because a lot of these guys, you don't see a lot of top 10 guys fighting each other that much any longer, and a lot of times they don't have to win a title. I mean, you look at Gervonta Davis. I mean, who did Gervonta Davis beat before he fought Pedraza? No top 10 guy. So this happens a lot, and because of that, there are a lot of holes in, this sort of hypothesis we can create, when evaluating a fighter. In my opinion, Brook is obviously the more experienced of the two, and I'm going to actually pick Brook here. Now, I'm not confident in my prediction, because I do see a lot where everybody's coming from, but for me, I'm going to pick Brook because I think, as John laid out, there might be a strategy there in where Brook just becomes a spoiler, kind of like he did against Sean Porter, where he just tries to pick a straight right hand, throws it, clutches, and then, makes Spence reset, and, then repeat, wash, rinse, and repeat. And he might be able to do that to a decision victory, or, Spence could, of course, just be robbed. I don't know. But, if there's one thing that Brook has going for him, it's that he has a good straight right hand, and that's typically the most effective punch you can land against a southpaw. My problem with Spence, of all the hand speed, the power, a lot of that looks to be there. I did see him outbox to the amateurs. I don't want to put too much weight on that, but he doesn't move his head that well. That's been the biggest knock on him so far. I mean, when you see him against guys like Algieri, you see him against guys like Bundu, and some of these lesser guys, he doesn't have to pay as much attention to his defense, because these guys can't crack. I mean, Algieri, he's not a big puncher, never been a big puncher. Bundu, obviously the same case. He's a bit older, not a big puncher. Brook, however, does have power. He does have speed. So I think Brook can take his way to a decision victory, but I would prefer him to open up and, give us a good fight. But I'm going to predict, again, Brook by decision.
All right, I think you're nuts. I think Ruben Castillo was right about you, Jeremiah. But I'm going to go with Errol Spence. I think Spence stops him in the 11th round. I really like Spence. And the thing that I question about Brook is this. The reason I wasn't that impressed with his performance fighting for the middleweight title against Golovkin was it just seems to me like as soon as shit got tough, he decided to just, pack it up and go home.
Yeah, well, he did have a jaw problem, didn't he? I mean, that was what they said, right?
That's what they said.
They said he had an eye socket fracture, and I'm not saying he didn't, but this is where I will add I always throw this out there because this is the way it works in law on both sides, and there a lot goes back and forth in the type of law I do. If you don't see it in the medical records, it doesn't exist. And fighters can obviously say, well, I've got privacy concerns. I don't want to release my medical records. And I'm applying this to all fighters, not just Kell Brook. And I'm not saying he didn't have a fractured eye socket, but I'm just saying they don't release the medical records. And there would never be a legal case, and we're not dealing with illegal cases here, but although sometimes in boxing that can come up with the crazy issues we see in boxing, but with fights being postponed and canceled and things like that. But I can tell you, from legally on the civil side, if you don't see the medical records, you're not generally taking it as an absolute truth. You're not taking it as any truth in the civil side legally. So, in boxing, we're not actually in a lawsuit all the time, only sometimes. So, we just never see the medical records released in these things. And if we did, we would know a lot more. But the fighters just don't. I mean, they could do it theoretically. I mean, there's nothing preventing them from granting releases, but they just don't want to do it for various privacy reasons, that they don't want people looking at those things, so you don't see it. So that was supposed to be what happened, but again, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but without medical records, it's just always a gray area for me. So I know what Mike's saying, though. I did feel in that fight with what Brook was paid, relatively short notice, and he was very heavy at that WBC advanced weigh-in, graduated weigh-in they have. You just wonder what kind of shape he was in, and despite all the hype, how committed he was to that one. Looked to me like he was just content to shoot his load in one round and then say, okay, I did my thing throwing my hands here, and Golovkin's not going to go anywhere, and this night's over. So I saw a little bit of that myself, and I'm not saying he didn't get hurt, but we'll have to see. But again, this is I got to be fair to the guy, though. I'm going to give him credit for taking this fight, because I didn't think he'd necessarily take a fight like this, so to speak. He doesn't have to. In the business world of boxing, he could fight somebody like Liam Smith at 154 pounds. He could have probably picked up that WBO title shot instead of Kamagai and Cotto. The WBO will make it for anybody, and I thought they could have easily set that one up. So when Canelo, quote-unquote, vacated, because I don't even consider these things real titles, I respect all the fighters, but it's just the alphabet organizations that I don't respect. So, we're going to, but this is what's great about Saturday night is, for once, we're going to find out, and I agree with Jeremiah 100%. I evaluate it the same way. The problem with modern boxing, unlike the glory days we had, say, in the early 80s, is true top 10 guys don't fight each other. So many times when you're making predictions in modern boxing, you've got to project, because the fighters really haven't faced other legit top 10 opposition.
All right, so that'll bring us to the boxing news. And I think the biggest news probably the entire year, Jeremiah, or the best news of the entire year, was Shannon Briggs testing positive, so him and Freza Kendo don't get to fight for a heavyweight championship.
Yeah, I'm honestly ecstatic about that. I mean, it's one of those things where it's a joke. It's a joke. I mean, what else can I say? I mean, Briggs and Kendo fighting for a belt. Kendo, I don't even think he's fought since 2014. Briggs hasn't fought anybody in the top 50. I mean, it's not even funny anymore, honestly. I mean, but I'm glad. I mean, people wonder how Briggs got shredded at 40-plus years old. Well, now we have some answers. But, to put that on as a regular whatever belt, and then have these guys go at it and then potentially get a crack at, their WBO title holder. Again, I'm not laughing. I mean, I enjoy a good stand-up gig, but, this doesn't do it for me.
No, that's a bad stand-up gig. I know John was hoping to see this fight, because I'm pretty sure that you had Briggs and Kendo ranked number 1 and number 2 on your original 8 rankings, right?
Yeah, and here's what I love to say about Shannon Briggs, and I'm not picking on him, but it amazes me, when fans don't truly look at a guy's career. Shannon Briggs, and think, this is not an exaggeration. Shannon Briggs is 45 years old. He literally has one legitimate top 10 victory in his entire career against Sergey Liakovich, which was an exciting fight where he made a great comeback. But that's he's 45 years old. In his entire boxing career, he got a gift against a 48-year-old George Foreman. And the other times he stepped up, he lost, and he lost badly.
Well, he got a gift against Francois Botha when it was called a draw.
Yeah, I mean, and here he is at 45 years old,
and that was 20 years ago.
You're right. He's got one top 10 victory in his entire career.
And he's still younger than what George Foreman was when he challenged George Foreman.
Yeah, it just so but the thing that's funny about the guy though is, and it was brutal. He showed, you never would have thought it, and he hung in there for such a brutal beating against Vitaly Klitschko that he showed he's got some kind of. He did not punch, but Klitschko's a puncher and just beat on him on the ropes for 12 rounds, and he would not quit. I don't know, so there's something. It just Shannon Briggs is, in that sense, he really is an enigma because he's hard to figure out. In his first test, and it wasn't a big test on HBO, and he fought Dirrell Wilson and got knocked out in 5 rounds, and you really always questioned him a little bit after that, and then you saw what he did when he was older against Vitaly Klitschko, just refusing to quit.
Well, he's the guy that always looked the part but never fought the part.
Right.
It's the old saying, he looked like Tarzan, played like Jane.
Yeah, and you would see flashes, you'd think, and here's the other thing, again, except for Liakovich, again, he's 45 years old, everybody talks about his knockout record. Who has he knocked out besides Liakovich in his entire career?
And he was losing the fight up until that point. I mean,
right.
I think he was,
completely losing that fight until that point, and that's the one time he knocked out a live opponent.
It was a WBO belt, so I mean it's not
right.
Let's I don't like to see these exaggerations, and of course I know you guys don't either. But I can't.
Yeah, but Liakovich was a good fighter at least. He was a top 10 heavyweight at the time.
He was at that time. Yeah,
he was. But what I'm starting to see, what I see in these trinkets, they perpetuate this lunacy. Okay, so what I've seen is that if Briggs, if he would have beat Oquendo, he would have been the only heavyweight champion in like 3 decades or something. If that's what that's what I saw. I kid you not. I cannot stand this sort of it's baloney. I mean, but again, you have. Again, the trinkets are laying the groundwork for this stuff, and you see that, right? So, okay, Briggs, he beats Foreman, beats in quotation marks, if anybody wants to know, and then he beats Liakovich for a WBO trinket in the 2000s. What was that? Over a decade ago. And then he beats Oquendo. I mean, really, no.
Yeah, and beating Oquendo. I mean, come on. Fraser Kendo lost to an old Evander Holyfield like a decade ago.
He lost to about 50-year-old Evander Holyfield 10 years ago. He got dropped.
Yeah, and he was almost 40 then, probably. All right, we got Miguel Cotto was just announced he's going to fight Kamagai. John, you want to speak on this? Who do you like in that fight?
Yeah, drum roll, please. It segs into what we just talked about for the WBO junior middleweight title. Now, Cotto has not been fighting as a junior middleweight because whatever he was weighing in at, he was still the middleweight champion, the linear middleweight champion, and WBC middleweight champion, if you care about the alphabets. And he hasn't been fighting at all. Kamagai hasn't been fighting anything close to top 10 opposition, and it's been at welterweight, and voila, they're fighting for the WBO 154-pound title on HBO. So HBO and whatever promoter is going to end up putting together this one, Golden Boy or whoever wanted it to be for a title, so the WBO was happy to step in. I like pointing this out because I'm pleading with any fans or heck, even the fighters, because if you're a good fighter, you want to separate yourself. You don't want to be in with with lesser fighters who can just pick up a belt easily when they're lesser talented. I mean, just stop perpetuating this stuff. The fight itself, it might have some action. Cotto's got, but the more I thought about it the last few hours since I saw it officially signed, even a Cotto coming off a layoff, he was fighting pretty well at middleweight, despite what some of the critics say. He probably's got enough talent to still get Kamagai out of there.
All right. Jeremiah, you got any comment on that or any other boxing news you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to comment on that because, again, it's just this round and around, here we go. Okay, now Miguel Cotto. I mean, I like Cotto. You know what I mean? He's put his work in, and he showed that he's one of the better fighters of his generation. I've got to give him that. But he is the king, it seems, of fighting for vacant titles. I mean, not only is this a vacant title, but I believe he fought, Michael Jennings, which was a vacant title. He fought, who did he beat? I think he beat Kelson Pinto for the vacant WBO title when he started his 140-pound reign. Yes, so he beat Kelson Pinto. I don't like this stuff. I mean, it's just over and over. What did Kamagai do to earn a title shot? Okay, he beat Jesus Soto Karass, who's been past his best for years and years and was never really a major player. Again, and now what? We get to trump up his resume as if it's better than and bigger than what it really is. I'm just not into it. I mean, it's a one-way trip here. Cotto's just too good for him. I don't care where he's at, how faded he is. Kamagai is just not good enough to hang with a guy like Cotto. It's a mismatch. Kamagai brings it. That's the only thing that I'll give him. But he should be fighting guys like Jesus Soto Karass, giving the fans, good fights like that. That's about all, he could be doing.
Kamagai could be heavyweight champion of the world if he gets to fight the Okendo Briggs winner.
He might be. I mean, there was who was Gennady Golovkin's opponent? The Ishida. So Ishida, the guy Golovkin knocked out with one punch, and funny enough, that was the only time I think he was stopped. He actually moved up to heavyweight after that fight. So I don't know. Maybe they can phone him up and see if he's in the business for being a heavyweight champion.
All right. So either one of you got any more news you want to talk about?
Yeah, I have one thing that I want to talk about.
Don't you bring up that Conor McGregor stuff again?
No, it's going to be better than that, better than last week's, and I want to see what you, Mike, and Jeremiah think about this. I am finding the date July 15th to be just very interesting in the strategies of marketing fighters, marketing TV. It's all come up within the last 2 weeks, and I think it's worth discussing. I think, frankly, it brings up a lot of issues. First of all, we have an HBO triple header that's been signed, which, to me, from a fight fan perspective, I'm interested in the fight, but from marketing a fighter or moving a fighter perspective, I find it a huge head-scratcher. Joe Smith, coming off 2 huge wins, building a name for himself. He's got a good story. His management is going to put him in with Sullivan Barrera in a fight where he's not the main event, and he's going to fight in California on an HBO Boxing After Dark, where that will start live in the East Coast very late on a Saturday night. He's going to be under Miura and Burkout, which is a good fight, but still a 130-pound fight. And there's going to be another fight on there with Castellanos, who just beat the corpse of Yuriorkis Gamboa against the Panamanian Jezreel Corrales. At the same time, Shawnee Monahan, who's been picked up by PBC, is going to be opening the new Nassau Coliseum, which has undergone a huge renovation, which is where Monahan and Smith are both from, and he's going to be fighting Marcus Brown, who's also from New York, and Staten Island nearby, in an all-New York battle. And that's going to be the undercard to Robert Guerrero and Omar Figueroa, two West Coast California guys who are going to be the headliner on Fox from the Nassau Coliseum, and there's going to be a heavyweight fight between Spielka and another undefeated Polish heavyweight. But why is Smith is not going to fight Monahan? Now Smith is a free agent with DeGuardia. He can fight on HBO or Showtime. DeGuardia's made a lot of deals with Heyman. How did this all happen? Brown, in my opinion, is going to tear apart Shoney Monahan in a semi-main event on Fox in the Nassau Coliseum, where they're both from. Marcus Brown looked like he meant complete business when he fought Thomas Williams Jr., and he's a very talented guy who hits hard. He's a southpaw. It's going to be the end of the line for Shoney Monahan. And you've got Smith fighting out in California against Sullivan Barrera, who exploited every defensive weakness Slava Shabransky had, and Slava Shabransky is 6'3". I like Joe Smith a lot. I don't think it's an unwinnable fight for him, but he better have his defensive A-plus game on if he's going to get in there against Sullivan Barrera, even though he hits very hard, because Sullivan Barrera is going to exploit every defensive weakness Joe Smith has. And why I'm stating all this is the whole thing makes no sense to me from a boxing marketing perspective, and I just wanted to see what your guys' thoughts are on it.
Jeremiah?
No, I'll take that. Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, first off, the main event for the PBC card, Figueroa versus Guerrero, that fits far better in a place like Texas or California, Inglewood, California, where the HBO card is. So, first off, I don't know why New York's there. I mean, Brown versus Monahan, I agree, Brown's going to win there. But I think the Smith Jr. Barrera fight is particularly worth talking about because Joe Smith is after his wins, and with his marketability, you think that he's probably in line for a guy like Adonis Stevenson or, a title shot. I mean, or a more winnable contest. Barrera is a good fighter, and, clearly you can see his amateur background. So for me, that's not quite taking advantage of Joe Smith in the way that you probably should. I mean, and we talked about this before. If you would have taken Joe Smith Jr. and put him against Sean Monahan, I actually think that would have been a better marketing idea. I'd rather see Barrera Smith is the more competitive fight, and generally I want to see the more competitive fights made. But from a marketing standpoint, you just put him in against Sean Monahan. You put him on the East Coast. It's a good sell. Smith gets a big knockout win, and then he moves on from there. Again, he's still in line for a guy like Adonis Stevenson. So I don't understand that either, especially the fact that he might be, on the undercard of Berchelt Mira, which I think is a really, really good fight. I like that one. So what do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's a great fight. And I think maybe they're thinking maybe he'll get more exposure on that undercard.
Maybe. I mean, possibly, but, the thing out in California, I mean, maybe. I mean, the card from
it makes no sense, Jeremiah. Just say, this is the thing. It's boxing. I've been watching boxing forever, and boxing in the 70s and 80s didn't make any sense either. They just had a lot better fighters. It was a lot deeper. And you get to watch everything on ABC or NBC or CBS or in a bar with your dad because it was on closed circuit. But it didn't cost $50 to $60. If it would have, my dad would have never done.
The part that made sense, though, was that before they basically committed suicide as a sport by going off the air on their own, boxing at that time had always gotten high ratings. In other words, when boxing went off the air on free TV, it had nothing to do with ratings. The ratings were high. Now, the ratings have not been, unfortunately, I hate to admit it, but in perspective with other sports, the ratings have not been high since PBC and Al Heyman have tried to bring it back. But when it originally went off 30 years ago, the ratings were high. It was never a ratings question. It was just then all the neglect over 30 years that fans forgot about it and you lost a generation. But, yeah, but Joe Smith, I just think, he's got a good story. He's a marketable guy. I like to see good fights, but to fight Sullivan Barrera in a non-main event, I'm going to take a guess that HBO has ponied in, and he's got a good payday there. But what I would argue there, I'm not his management, and I don't know the terms, and I'm sure they're looking out for his interests. But my guess would be that it was some kind of a significant enough payday that they thought they'd take the chance that Barrera got dropped by Ward, he got dropped by Shabransky, and they figured Joe Smith's the puncher. But I like fighters taking risks, and I like competitive fights. That's a legit top 10 fight, the kind of fight I love in that sense. But just like Jeremiah said, I'm pointing towards the same thing. Couldn't any kind of deal been worked out to fight Monahan? I mean, they're reopening the Nassau Coliseum basically after it underwent a huge renovation. Those guys are both from there. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer now. Monahan is now in with PBC, and Smith's a free agent, but you would have thought they could have worked that out. And then plus the PBC card's going to be on Fox, coming from New York, and then Smith, a New York fighter, is going to be competing against that on premium cable HBO at roughly around the same time. It just seems to me a shame for boxing in that kind of sense. And like Jeremiah stated, you got Omar Figueroa and Robert Guerrero. Significance might not be that high, but as we all know, there's probably will be some action there. And it would
my
seem
big question is, how the hell is Robert Guerrero still in main events of big cards?
Yeah. Well, let me say something real quick. Figueroa has been a letdown, hasn't he? I mean, this was a guy who we had high hopes for at 135, and he's been inactive. So not only is Figueroa versus Guerrero not really that interesting besides, a little bit of action, but it's concerning for me that Figueroa can't keep his weight down. I mean, there's a guy who started, I think, at 130, 135, and now he's all the way up to 147 after being inactive. But one more point is that the PBC puts a card on, same day as HBO. I think the HBO card is far better.
HBO card is a better card, but I just think that's that premium cable and free TV thing that with the Fox platform, that PBC card, they'll hurt each other. It's going to be one of those classic boxing fiascos. They'll hurt each other, and just because of the platform, the PBC card will probably get more viewers. I'll be watching both. I'm sure all three of us will be watching both. Sometimes PBC has been starting those at 8, and that's going to be a boxing after dark on HBO, so it may work out for all of us like that. But we're hardcore fans. I'm always looking for, for the good of the sport, can we pick up some casual fans somewhere? I'd like to see Joe Smith getting seen by casual fans.
Yeah, but hell, John, we've been looking for the good of the sport forever. The problem is the promoters and them never do.
Right, and that's why we stay in this cycle that we're in that usually trends slightly downhill. But
yeah, I mean, since 1986, 87, boxing's gone downhill because of the lack of network TV. And the problem is now is the reason the ratings aren't the same. It's not just the 30 years off, but you don't have Olympic boxing in the form it used to be in 1976, 1984. You don't have guys that can be built up by, he was an Olympic gold medalist because U.S. Olympic boxing has went to hell. You get Freddie Roach offered last time around to help him for free, and they turned him down. So, you don't really have guys like Sugar Ray Leonard, even in Evander Holyfield, who was coming out of the Olympics. If you look at it, the time we were growing up, probably mid-'70s through the mid-'90s, those were all past Olympians that we saw. And, hell, if you remember the 1984 Olympic boxing team, 4 of them, their pro debut was at Madison Square Garden on ABC.
Oh, yeah, well, you went back to the 70s and before, and that's when people, which is unimaginable now, that's when people used to watch amateur boxing on TV. In other words, on Saturdays, not only did you have pro boxing on, you had the USA was having a dual meet against
the USA against Cuba. Taylor Stevenson to be fighting Dirrell Biggs or something.
Yeah, and it would be on national TV on a Saturday afternoon, and people would watch it. So, yeah, all that's changed, and I just always like to cheer for the sport. Where I like to play amateur commissioner of the sport and think of okay, here's what the sport should be doing. This would be a good idea, and the July 15th thing, there's some good in both cards. The only good really of the PBC card is there's some possibility, there's some potential for action there with the 3 fights they've got on there, and the HBO's got some real good quality fights with the Burktout and Miura and the Joe Smith and Barrera. Those are real good fights. So you hate to see them going up against each other, and then you'd like to see more exposure for some of these good fights. And the same night as a Fox card, that HBO is going to do a Boxing After Dark thing. Just kind of a shame all around for the sport.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this week. But I want to thank both you guys for coming on, and maybe we'll do it again next week. What do you think, Jeremiah? We usually do, don't we?
Yeah. Let me just get one quick word in, just kind of a little final word, because we've got a fight on May 26th, and Aegis Kovialauskas, a former guest of ours, is partaking against Daniel Echeverria, I don't even know how to say his name, Echeverria, in an 8-round contest at the 147-pound division. I just want to wish him luck. That's also a solid card with a number of other solid prospects on the way up. Tune in for that if you can. And again, I just want to wish him good luck.
Yeah, I was going to ignore that because I can't say either one of them's names.
Yeah, but he's a good fighter. He's a good welterweight fighter.
Yeah, he's a good.
And he's been
prospect
on the show before, so that makes it even better.
Yep.
What I want to remind everybody, you can go check out that interview, our interview with Livingstone Bramble last week, Carlos Palomino, Lamont Peterson, and more. Tim Witherspoon have all been on the show before, but you can go to gruelingtruth.net and check that out. We should have posted this weekend. We'll have an interview with former great fighter Armando Muniz, have him on here to talk about his legendary battles with Carlos Palomino. Other than that, check out replenishingcaretechnologiesinc.com. Check out www.gridironmode.com. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.